much more difficult than normal dominant 7 chords, right? I remember thinking all the dominant chords were the same when I started out. I remember trying to play over altered chords, and I would just think about it as a normal like dominant 7 chord in its purest form, and then I would like solo and it would sound so bad. It will sound, and it's something I don't even know what it is. Like something when you think about an altered chord as a normal, it's like one note difference, but it sounds so bad if you just don't treat it as like what it is. Every time that shit happened, I was like, what the fuck is that? I don't want to do this. It's so fun. But Armin, what is the difference between an altered chord and a normal dominant 7 chord? Here is my understanding. If you have a G7 chord in its purest form, if you would stack the notes on top of each other, or if you would play an arpeggio, the notes would consist of the root, the third, the fifth, and the flat 7, right? These notes derive from the key of C major because the G7 is diatonic to C major because it's the 5th degree of C major. It's the dominant of C, so it's in the key of C. So a G7 in its purest form is therefore diatonic to C major. Now an altered chord, imagine we stack it the same way. This time we're stacking the root, the third, the fifth, the flat 7, and the 9th. So in this case, let's think of a G9 instead for the sake of explaining how the altered chord works. So if you have a G9, which is the same as a G7, just with the 9 also, for the G9 to become altered, the only thing that will happen is you flat or you sharpen the 5th and/or the 9th degree. So you can either do both or you do one of them. So it's the 5th and the 9th degree that's either sharpened or flattened, and there you have an altered chord. So a G7 with a flat 5, also called a sharp 11, sounds like this. A G7 with a sharp 5 or a flat 13 sounds like this. So the big question is, how the fuck do you solo over these chords? A good question to ask first though is, where is the chord going to? So you don't want to just think about, okay, this chord, how do I solo over this chord? The bigger question is, where is it going to? Can you resolve it in a good way? Maybe that's a better question to ask. I bet the way you think about chord changes is playing on the chord, right? You're like, okay, how do I play over this chord? And how do I play over this chord? But the real thing is thinking about it playing to another chord. So you're like, how do I play to that chord? How do I land on that chord that comes after? You know what I'm saying? This is like the biggest constraints I see in people playing jazz. They're like too focused on the chords that's standing still, but not on the actual, like, the thing that happens when the chord changes, because that's where we hear stuff. That's where like the third becomes a minor third. You know what I'm saying? That's where you can like make that change happen in the way you improvise, you know what I'm saying? Usually an altered chord is what comes before a minor chord in a minor 2-5-1, right? You have a D minor 7 flat 5, G7 altered, and then you have a C minor. Here is an example where I play a phrase from the altered scale over the G7, leading into C minor. An altered scale is basically a melodic minor scale, but from, how the fuck do you explain this? Okay, so an altered scale is basically a melodic minor scale, a half step up from the root of the dominant chord. So in this case we have a G7, right? The altered scale would basically be going up a half step to an A flat or G sharp, whatever you want to call it, and you play a melodic minor scale from there. A flat melodic minor scale. over the G7, and there you have the altered scale. For me, that's easier, so I'm gonna tell you what's easy for me. I know many people be like, but you should think about the G as the root. No, for me, I think it's easier to think about it as a melodic minor scale from a half step up. Using a Pat Martino approach is like one of my favorite ways of doing this. He would think in two ways. He'd either do an A flat Dorian / melodic minor idea into C minor, like this. Or he would just use an F minor, or as I would do it, I would think about it as A flat major 7. That's the third of F minor, so you can basically play a major 7 there and you will get the same notes from the F minor. I would play an A flat major 7 leading into C minor over the G7 chord. Here is the same lick that I just played, but resolving it to a C major instead of a C minor. As you can see, you can always use altered lines on any dominant chord, as long as it resolves, right? As long as it resolves to the next chord in the tune. That's the most important thing. If you have an altered chord that's just standing still, you can try this half-whole diminished lick that I like. The scales over altered chords usually consist of the altered scale, the half-whole diminished scale, the mixolydian flat 2 flat 6 scale. Remember though, I never advocate for playing scales up and down. Instead, practice resolving to the next chord. You can have the scale in mind while you resolve. Do it in a simplistic way that will make you hear exactly which notes that change, right? An example of me resolving a G7 sharp 5 to a C minor in a simplistic way, this is how I would practice resolving. And this is how I would resolve a sharp 9 chord that goes to a C minor. And here is the same lick again, but resolving to a C major. You see what I say here? I hope you got a few ideas now on how you should approach the altered dominant motherfuckers. It's not that difficult. I mean, usually it's just one note that's different, and then it's just how you want to approach it. You could do it in a very simplistic way, or you can go nuts and like learn all the fucking modes of the altered scale and shit. I don't even know that shit. I hope it's less of a mystery now, bro. And I hope I'll see you in the next video too. Link in bio for one-on-one lessons. I'll teach you one-on-one. How does that sound like? Alright, see you in the next vid. Bye bye.